He was an orphan, invisible and starving, rejected by everyone in his settlement. Then, deep in the forest, he found a wounded enemy warrior, someone he was taught to fear. What happened next didn't just change their lives. It shattered everything they thought they knew about friend and foe. Where are you watching this from? Let us know in the comments below. If you love stories like this, don't forget to subscribe. Now, get ready for a journey you won't forget. They knelt before me. 200 warriors, their faces streaked with colors of the earth, their chests marked with patterns older than the towns I'd grown up in. Every knee bent, every head bowed, the weight of their gaze replaced by something far heavier: respect. For me, a boy who, just days ago, had been nothing more than a shadow slipping between alleys, scavenging for food behind doors slammed in my face. The air was heavy with smoke from the fires burning at the edges of their camp. The smell of leather, of pine, of the river not far beyond it all mixed into something strange and new, something that didn't belong to my world until this moment. I stood there in ragged clothes, my hair a mess from days without a comb, my hands still stained from soil and bark. I could feel every beat of my heart in my ears. The man beside me, the one they called Silent Bear, rested a hand on my shoulder. His grip was steady now, his wounds mostly healed, but I could still remember the first time I saw him: broken, breath shallow, eyes closed as if he were halfway into another world. The memory of that day was as clear as the cold water I had carried to his lips. None of them knew the whole story yet, not like I did. They knew only that I had saved him. They didn't know about the hunger that had driven me into the forest in the first place, or the fear that had nearly sent me running the moment I saw him lying there. They didn't know the way my chest had tightened when I noticed the small carved figure hanging from his neck, swinging gently with each breath he took. Now, the chief's voice broke through the silence. In his language, he spoke words that seemed to ripple across the crowd. Every head lowered even further, and the sound of it, the rustle of fabric, the soft thud of knees on the earth, was something I'd never forget. The old man stepped toward me, his eyes locked on mine, and for the first time in my life, I felt the strange weight of belonging pressing down on my shoulders. I had no idea then how quickly that feeling had been growing inside me. But to understand it, you'd have to go back 3 days earlier to the edge of the settlement where I had been trying to survive in a place that didn't want me. It had been cold that morning, the kind of cold that makes your stomach ache worse than hunger, the kind that turns the air into something you can almost chew. I'd been searching for anything that wouldn't make me sick if I ate it. Behind Miller's store was usually my best chance, not because he wanted me there, but because I knew how to move quietly enough to go unnoticed. Most of the time. That day, the quiet didn't last. I'd learned a long time ago that in Miller's part of town, you didn't look anyone in the eye unless you wanted trouble. Eyes were invitations, and invitations got answered with fists or worse. So, I kept my head down as I crept along the back alley that ran behind the store. The snow crunched under my boots, each step leaving a thin print in the half-frozen mud. I hated the sound it felt like it carried for miles, but hunger didn't leave room for fear. My stomach gnawed at me, hollow and impatient. It had been almost 2 days since I'd eaten anything that wasn't half-rotten. The apple bounced in my pocket with every step, the bread digging into my side. My feet pounded over the uneven ground as I darted between houses, past the barn, over the small frozen stream that ran at the settlement's edge. Miller's shouts faded, but I didn't stop. My lungs burned, my fingers were numb, and still I ran. The forest was ahead, dark, quiet, and forbidden. Every child in the settlement had been told the stories, the people who lived beyond the trees, the ones who painted their faces and moved like shadows. Sometimes the grown-ups spoke of them with fear, other times with a strange kind of respect they didn't think we could hear. Either way, the message was the same: don't go in. But that morning, with Miller's voice behind me and the sharp sting of cold in my chest, I went in. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Not the kind of silence you get when people stop talking, but a deeper one, the kind that swallows footsteps and breath. Snow clung to the low branches, and every so often, a clump would fall, breaking the quiet with a soft whump. I pushed deeper, weaving between tall pines. My heartbeat slowed, my breath forming clouds that floated upward and vanished. The settlement was gone behind me, hidden by the trees. For the first time in months, I didn't feel watched. I found a fallen log and sat, pulling the potato from my pocket. My teeth sank into the cold, earthy flesh, and though it was raw and bitter, I chewed like it was the finest meal I'd ever had. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was just another patch of snow, but then it moved, a shape half buried under white, lying still at the base of a tree. My first thought was animal, maybe a deer, maybe something dangerous. My hand tightened around the potato like it was a weapon. I took a cautious step forward. It wasn't an animal. It was a man. His hair was long, tangled with frost, and his skin had the pale gray tint of someone who'd been lying in the cold far too long. Across his chest was a patterned sash, the kind I'd only seen in the sketches hanging in the settlement schoolhouse, the kind belonging to the ones we were told to avoid. For a moment, I thought he was dead. Then his chest rose, just barely, and a faint cloud of breath escaped his lips. I should have turned and run. Every story I'd been told screamed at me to leave. But something about the way his hand was curled, fingers barely holding onto a small carved figure hanging from a cord around his neck, made my feet stay planted. I didn't understand why, but I knelt beside him. His skin was cold, his breathing shallow. The figure, a tiny bear, swung gently with each breath. I reached out, hesitating, then pulled my hand back. "Hey!" I said, my voice sounding too loud in the quiet. "Can you hear me?" His eyelids flickered. Just for a second. I didn't know what to do. I had nothing but a bruised apple, half a potato, and a stiff piece of bread. No blanket, no fire, no way to carry him. But leaving him here meant he wouldn't be breathing for long. The forest around me felt different now, heavier. Somewhere in the distance, a raven called. I looked at the man again, then at the direction I'd come from. If I went back to the settlement and told anyone, they'd either finish him off or leave him to freeze. So I made a choice. I pulled my coat tighter around me, broke the bread in half, and placed it near his hand. Then I started gathering whatever branches I could find, my fingers aching in the cold. I didn't know then that this choice would change everything, that it would lead me to the moment, just 3 days later, when I'd stand before 200 warriors with every knee bent to me. All I knew was that a stranger's life was now tangled with mine. The cold bit into my skin as I gathered dry branches, leaves, anything I could find to build a small shelter. The forest floor was covered in frost, but I moved as quickly as I could, ignoring the numbness creeping into my fingers. I knew I needed to keep him warm, or he wouldn't last through the night. The man's breathing remained shallow and irregular, his body limp against the fallen log. I dared not touch him again, afraid I'd cause more harm. But the carved wooden bear hanging from his neck caught my eye every few seconds, a fragile reminder that beneath all the stories, beneath the pain and fear, he was someone's son. I tore off my own shirt, the fabric thin and worn, and carefully pressed it against the worst of his wounds. There was a gash across his shoulder, dark with dried blood, and a long cut across his ribs that looked like it had been made by a blade. My hands trembled, but I tried to focus, to remember the few lessons I'd overheard from the doctor who sometimes passed through the settlement. I found a hollow in the roots of a tree and cleared it of snow, then dragged the man there as gently as I could. His weight was more than I expected, but I supported him with all my strength. Every step was agony in my arms and legs, but I kept moving, driven by a mix of fear and something else, a growing sense of responsibility. By the time I settled him inside the small natural cave, twilight had started to drape the forest in purple shadows. I arranged pine boughs beneath him to cushion his body, then knelt beside him, holding what little water I had in cupped hands, offering drops to his cracked lips. His eyes fluttered open, dark and clouded with pain. I held my breath, waiting for a scream or a curse, but instead, he looked at me with a confusion that made me feel smaller than I already was. His lips moved, but I couldn't understand the words. It didn't matter. The sound of distant voices in the forest made my heart hammer in my chest. I froze, staring toward the entrance of the cave. I couldn't tell if they were friends or enemies, but I knew one thing: if they found us, they wouldn't be kind. I covered the entrance with brush and branches, doing my best to mask our presence. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves felt like a signal to the danger lurking nearby. Days passed like this. I stole food from the edges of the settlement, careful not to get caught. Some nights, I'd sneak to the creek and fill my hands with water, praying it was enough to keep the man alive. We communicated in silence, through gestures and broken words. He called himself Silent Bear, a name that seemed heavy with meaning, even if I couldn't fully grasp it. The old stories in the settlement painted men like him as monsters, merciless warriors who attacked without warning, who took lives and left death behind. But Silent Bear was nothing like that. He was broken, hurt. And slowly, through the quiet hours we shared, I realized something deeper. He was scared. I was scared too. But fear didn't stop me from helping him. One night, when the moon was a pale silver sliver in the sky, I heard footsteps again, closer this time. Not from the settlement, but from the direction of the forest. Shadows moved beyond the trees, and my heart froze. Silent Bear stirred, his eyes wide with sudden alertness. He reached for the carved wooden bear at his neck and clutched it tightly, as if drawing strength from it. The voices came closer, angry and sharp, speaking in a language I didn't understand. I held my breath and tightened my grip on the makeshift bandages I'd wrapped around his wounds. When the first warrior stepped into the clearing, his eyes locked onto me with suspicion. Others followed, their rifles raised, faces painted like the ones I'd only seen in nightmares. I expected them to kill me on the spot. But Silent Bear rose with all the strength he had left and spoke to them in his language, his voice fierce despite his weakness. He told them of the boy who had saved him, who had given him water and bandages, who risked everything to keep him alive. There was silence. Then questions. Doubt. I felt their eyes burn into me, weighing me, judging me. The old stories they told about my people, the settlers, were not kind. I was supposed to be an enemy, a threat. But I wasn't. I was just a boy who had nowhere else to go. The forest around the cave felt alive with tension, silent but heavy, as if every leaf and twig was holding its breath. I could feel eyes watching us from every shadow, every rustle, making me jump. My heart hammered so loud it felt like it might burst out of my chest. I had never been this close to danger before, never felt so exposed, so small. The warriors' faces were painted with dark stripes and patterns, their eyes fierce and unyielding. They didn't lower their rifles, not even when Silent Bear spoke with authority. I tried to make myself smaller, to disappear, but I knew I was the center of their suspicion. They saw me as a traitor, a spy, a danger. Silent Bear's voice was steady, even if his body was weak. He told them in their language about what I had done, how I had found him bleeding, alone, and had chosen to help instead of turning away. He said I was different, not like the settlers who hunted them, who burned their villages, who spilled their blood. The leader among them, a tall man with a scar across his cheek, stepped forward. His rifle didn't waver as he questioned Silent Bear. I couldn't understand the words, but I could hear the challenge in his tone. I watched Silent Bear's eyes flicker with pain and exhaustion, but he stood his ground. He spoke again, this time slowly, using broken English I could barely follow. They say, trust is earned, not given. The scarred warrior didn't lower his weapon, but there was something in Silent Bear's voice that made the others hesitate. After a long moment, the leader nodded sharply, and one by one, the rifles lowered just a fraction. But the suspicion didn't fade. Not yet. Then the conversation shifted. The warriors talked amongst themselves, voices rising and falling like the wind. I could tell from their gestures that they were debating my fate, whether to kill me or to believe Silent Bear's words. I wanted to run, to vanish into the woods and never look back, but I stayed, rooted by something stronger than fear. Hope, maybe. or the faintest feeling that this moment mattered more than anything I'd ever done. Then, from the edge of the clearing, an older woman appeared. Her presence was commanding, almost like a storm rolling in. She moved quickly, her eyes scanning me as if trying to read every secret hidden beneath my dirt-smudged skin. She spoke in English, her voice clear and precise. "You are the white child who saved my nephew's life." It wasn't a question. Her gaze was sharp and unyielding. I wanted to shrink away, to disappear beneath the earth. But I stood still, barely breathing. She continued, "White children do not wander deep in the forest alone. White children do not risk death for the life of a red man. So tell me, what are you truly? Why should we not kill you where you stand?" The camp fell silent. Every pair of eyes was fixed on me, waiting for my answer. I could feel the weight of their distrust pressing down on me, like a heavy blanket of ice. I swallowed hard. My voice was barely a whisper, but I knew they heard me. I'm nobody. It was the only truth I had. I'm an orphan. I sleep in barns and eat scraps. The people in my settlement want me to disappear. Maybe I should have. But when I found Silent Bear dying, I couldn't walk away. The woman's eyes narrowed, and she exchanged a few words with the scarred warrior. Then she spoke again, softer this time. "Your people and mine have spilled much blood. Your soldiers killed Silent Bear's wife and child. Your settlers take our hunting grounds and poison our streams. Why would you save one of us when your own kind would celebrate his death?" Her question hung heavy in the air like smoke from the campfire. How could I explain something I barely understood myself? I looked around at the faces, all strangers with stories I would never know. Some angry, some curious, some weary. "Because I'm hurt," I said simply. "Because I know what it's like to be alone and afraid. Because I saw that same look in Silent Bear's eyes. My parents, they taught me to help people before they died. Even if those people don't look like me. Even if they speak a different language." The old woman's expression softened, just a little. She spoke again in her language, and the others listened closely. Arguments broke out among them, voices raised, hands gesturing fiercely. Some wanted to kill me on the spot, others argued I should be spared. Silent Bear tried to speak, but the noise drowned him out. Then, a new voice cut through the chaos, a voice deep and commanding, strong enough to silence the crowd. From the shadows stepped a man unlike any I had ever seen. His hair was white as snow, braided with feathers and bones that clicked softly as he moved. He walked slowly, but every step carried the weight of years, of wisdom earned through pain. This was the chief, Iron Wolf. His dark eyes swept across the camp, then settled on me. "I have lived through 60 winters," he said, his voice calm but carrying power. "I have seen white men lie with words sweet as honey while their hearts planned murder. I have watched them break promises before the words left their mouths." He paused, letting his gaze rest on me. "So when my warriors tell me a white child saved my son's life, I wonder, is this another trick?" I felt my throat go dry, but I looked him in the eye. "I'm not trying to trick anyone. I just did what felt right." Iron Wolf circled me like a wolf hunting prey, his hands clasped behind his back. "What felt right? You risked your life for a stranger because it felt right? You gave water to an enemy because it felt right? You tended wounds made by your own people's weapons because it felt right?" His voice grew stronger with each question, and I began to understand. He was testing me. "Tell me, small one," he said, stopping in front of me. "What do you think your people would do if they knew you saved one of us?" The answer came without hesitation. They would probably kill me. Iron Wolf nodded slowly, "And knowing that, you saved him anyway." His words echoed through the clearing, and I felt the weight of every pair of eyes on me. He reached into a leather pouch at his belt and pulled out a small wooden horse, worn and weathered by years of handling. "My grandson made 2 of these before sickness took him," Iron Wolf said softly. "One for his father, one for me." He held the toy reverently. When I look at this, I see the hands that carved it. Small hands, kind hands, hands that made beauty instead of destruction. He looked directly at me. "You have such hands, young one. I see it in how gently you treated my son's wounds." The camp fell silent again. The tension shifted, softened by the chief's words. Iron Wolf turned to his people and spoke in their language, his voice firm and commanding. He told them about a vision he had 3 nights before, a vision of a small figure with pale skin tending to one of their wounded warriors. In the vision, the figure had no tribe, no family, no home. But their heart was pure, untouched by the hatred that poisoned so many of their peoples. The vision said this figure would come to remind them that goodness exists in all people. As Iron Wolf spoke, more warriors emerged from the forest edges. They stood in formation, painted and armed, surrounding the camp in a circle that grew wider and stronger. Iron Wolf raised his voice so every ear could hear. Today, that vision has come to pass. He told them how this boy saved Silent Bear when he could have left him to die. How he risked his own life to show mercy to an enemy. He said this boy proved the human heart can choose compassion over vengeance. One by one, the warriors dropped to one knee, heads bowed in respect. Nearly 200 men, battle-scarred and hardened by years of war, honoring a small orphan boy. In our tradition, Iron Wolf said, placing his weathered hand on my shoulder, when someone saves the life of a tribal member, they become family. Not just to that person, but to all of us. You are no longer an orphan without a people. You are my grandson now, brother to Silent Bear, member of our tribe. Tears burned my eyes for the first time in years, tears of relief, of joy, of finally finding where I belonged. The sun had sunk low behind the distant hills by the time the warriors' bowed heads slowly rose, and the silence that followed felt almost sacred. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just nobody. I was family, a word so heavy with meaning that it almost crushed me under its weight. It was as if the earth beneath me shifted, the very air changed. I was part of something larger than the broken barn I had once called home, larger than the cruel settlement that had spat me out like a forgotten shadow. Iron Wolf's hand lingered on my shoulder a moment longer before he slowly withdrew it. His eyes softened as he gave a small nod. Tonight, you sleep in the lodge of the warriors. Tomorrow, you will learn our ways. I swallowed hard, barely able to breathe. The warriors parted to make way for me, a path opening as if by magic. The camp was buzzing with whispers, glances shooting in my direction, some wary, some curious, others something close to approval. I followed Iron Wolf, my legs shaky but determined, toward a large lodge at the edge of the clearing. The night air smelled of pine, smoke, and earth. Firelight danced on the lodge's thick animal hide walls, and the murmur of voices rose and fell like waves. Inside, warmth wrapped around me, a stark contrast to the cold loneliness that had been my constant companion. I sank onto a pile of furs, my muscles trembling from exhaustion and disbelief. Silent Bear lay nearby, propped up on pine boughs, his eyes flickering with faint light. He gave me a small nod of thanks before drifting back into a restless sleep. I wanted to speak, to ask questions, to say something that would make this all feel more real. But my voice was gone, swallowed by the weight of everything that had happened in the last few days. Iron Wolf settled across from me, his eyes like quiet embers in the firelight. Tomorrow, he said simply, you will meet the others. The next morning came wrapped in silence, broken only by the soft chirping of birds and the distant rustle of leaves. I awoke stiff and sore, but with a strange kind of hope that I hadn't felt in years. Outside the lodge, the camp was already stirring. Women moved with practiced grace. Children ran between the lodges laughing, and warriors prepared for the day ahead with quiet purpose. Iron Wolf approached me with a solemn expression. Come, he said, leading me toward a large circle in the center of the camp where the elders gathered. The elders were a mix of men and women, their faces etched with lines of age and wisdom. They regarded me with steady eyes, measuring and weighing the story I carried on my shoulders. One of them, a woman with silver hair braided tightly against her scalp, stepped forward. She spoke in English, her voice calm but firm. You have done what few could imagine, child. You have crossed boundaries that blood has drawn and risked your life to save one of ours." Her words made my chest tighten. I wasn't a hero, I was just a scared boy trying to survive. "But now," she continued, "you must learn what it means to live among us." Days turned into weeks. I learned the rhythms of this new life, the quiet routines of dawn prayers, the careful way the women prepared food, the stories told around the fire that carried the weight of generations. I struggled with the language at first, but the warriors were patient, their broken English mixing with their native tongue in lessons that felt more like moments of connection than formal teaching. Silent Bear was my guide, my protector, and my friend. His strength returned slowly, and with it came stories of his people, tales of honor, loss, and resilience that made me realize how much hatred had blinded me before. The carved wooden horse that had hung around his neck became my talisman, a symbol of the fragile thread of kindness that had pulled me into this new world. But life here was not without challenges. Some warriors still eyed me with suspicion, their hands resting on the rifles slung across their backs. The scars on their faces told stories I couldn't imagine, and their quiet wariness was a reminder that trust was earned, not given freely. There were moments when I felt like an outsider, a ghost trapped between two worlds. The settlers who had shunned me were still out there, and the tribespeople who had welcomed me were wary of what I represented. I missed the familiar bitterness of the settlement's cold shoulders, the cruel taunts that had shaped my childhood, even as I hated the fear and loneliness they brought. One night, under a sky splattered with stars, Iron Wolf sat beside me by the fire. "You carry both worlds with you, boy," he said softly. "That is your greatest strength and your greatest burden." I looked up at him, feeling the weight of his words settle deep inside me. "Why me?" I asked. "Why did you choose to accept me when everyone else wanted me gone?" Iron Wolf smiled, a slow, knowing smile. "Because you remind me of something I thought I had lost," he said. "Hope." In the days that followed, my place in the tribe grew stronger. I learned to track animals through the dense forest, to listen to the wind and understand its whispers. I shared meals cooked over open flames, my hands stained with soot and earth. The warriors taught me how to hold a rifle, how to move silently through the underbrush, and how to read the signs left by nature and man alike. Slowly, I shed the skin of the orphan who had wandered alone and became part of something greater. But peace was fragile. The outside world, settlers, soldiers, and rival tribes was a constant threat looming just beyond the trees. The tension between the tribes and the settlement simmered like a pot on the verge of boiling over. Rumors of raids, stolen horses, and broken treaties traveled on the wind, carried in whispered warnings and guarded glances. One afternoon, while practicing with a bow, I heard shouting near the edge of the camp. Warriors ran toward the sound, their faces grim. I followed, heart pounding. A group of settlers had come, armed and angry. They accused the tribe of theft, of attacking their outposts, and demanded justice. Iron Wolf met them calmly, his voice steady as he spoke of peace and understanding. But the settlers would not listen. Words turned to threats, threats to violence. The fragile peace I had come to know trembled on the edge of destruction. That night, as the camp gathered around the fire, Iron Wolf spoke of the path ahead. "We walk a narrow line between war and peace," he said. "But it is our choice how we walk it." His gaze found mine. "You, young one, are a bridge. A chance for our worlds to find common ground." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that kindness could be stronger than hate. But the forest was full of secrets, and the shadows whispered of dangers yet to come. And in my heart, I knew that the real test of who I was, who we all were, was just beginning. The morning after the confrontation with the settlers dawned cold and sharp, the air biting at my skin like a warning. I woke to the scent of pine and smoke drifting through the lodge's opening. Silent Bear was awake too, sitting near the fire, his eyes dark and thoughtful. The tension from the previous day had settled into the camp like a storm cloud hanging low. The warriors moved silently, faces grim beneath their painted war markings. The children stayed close to their mothers, sensing the unrest. Iron Wolf's words from the night before echoed in my mind. You, young one, are a bridge. It felt like a heavy mantle to carry, like the weight of two worlds pressing down on my shoulders. But if there was a chance to build something better, to create peace where only suspicion and bloodshed had thrived, I was determined to try. That morning, Iron Wolf summoned me. His lodge smelled of burning sage and pine needles, a familiar comfort in this strange new home. He looked at me with eyes that had seen too much pain to ever be fooled by appearances. There is a path you must walk, he said, between fear and trust, between the past and what might be. I nodded, though I barely understood. Today, he continued, you will visit the settlement. The words hit me like a cold gust. Returning to the place where I had been nothing but a shadow? A ghost? The thought twisted my gut. But Iron Wolf's gaze was firm, unwavering. To build bridges, we must walk across them, he said simply. As the sun rose higher, I prepared for the journey. Silent Bear handed me a small satchel with some dried meat and a water skin. The warriors who accompanied me were quiet, their eyes sharp and watchful. I was both the outsider and the honored guest, a strange position that made me more vulnerable than I'd ever been. The path to the settlement was familiar but different, seen through new eyes. The signs of struggle and survival etched into the landscape seemed clearer now. The rutted dirt roads, the crumbling wooden buildings, the distant smoke from chimneys, it was all part of the world I'd left but never really escaped. As we approached, the settlement stirred. Farmers tending their fields paused to watch the approaching group. Children ran indoors, clutching their mothers' skirts. The settlers' eyes fixed on us, some with suspicion, others with curiosity, but none with warmth. I could feel the weight of their gaze, the unspoken questions. Who is this boy? Why does he walk with warriors? The leader of the settlers, a stern man named Miller, stepped forward. His eyes narrowed when they met mine. You've been missing, boy, he said, voice rough. We thought you were dead, or worse. I didn't answer. Instead, I looked past him at the fields, the houses, the people who had never cared enough to look for me before. Miller's gaze hardened. What business do you have with these men? You know they're our enemies. I swallowed the lump in my throat. I'm not your enemy, I said quietly. The words seemed to hang in the air, fragile as glass. Over the next few days, I found myself walking the fine line between two worlds, sometimes caught between sneers and outright hostility, other times met with hesitant acceptance. The settlers were wary, their eyes always searching for a reason to reject me. But I was not the same boy who had once scavenged for scraps in the shadows. I carried with me the stories, the strength, and the dignity of a people who had taught me what it meant to belong. One afternoon, I returned to the camp with news. The settlers were planning a hunting party, a show of force meant to intimidate the tribes and secure the disputed lands. Iron Wolf's face was grave when I relayed the message. They do not understand that the land does not belong to one people, he said. I knew then that the fragile peace we had was hanging by a thread. The next days were a blur of preparation. The warriors sharpened their weapons, reinforced their lodges, and watched the horizon for signs of movement. The tension in the camp was a living thing, breathing, pulsing, waiting. One evening, as the camp settled into uneasy quiet, I sat beside Silent Bear. He was stronger now, his wounds healed, but the pain in his eyes lingering. We fight because we must, he said quietly. But sometimes, fighting is not the answer. I nodded. I want to believe there is another way. Silent Bear looked at me, a flicker of something like hope crossing his face. Then we must be brave enough to find it. That night, under a sky blanketed with stars, I realized the path ahead would not be easy, but I was no longer the boy who ran from shadows. I was part of something greater, a bridge between worlds, a spark of hope in a land torn by fear and hatred. And I would walk that path, no matter the cost. The days that followed felt like walking through a storm that no one could predict the end of. The hunting party from the settlers came closer each morning, their numbers growing, their faces hardening like cold stone. They were led by Miller himself, a man whose hatred for the tribes was as old and deep as the land they fought over. I had seen his glare before, one that could freeze a man in his tracks. But now, I was no longer just a nameless boy hiding in the shadows. I carried the weight of two worlds, and I was determined to do whatever it took to stop the inevitable bloodshed. Iron Wolf gathered his warriors, his voice steady but fierce as he spoke. "The land is not ours to take by force," he said. "We will defend our home, but only if we must." His words settled over the camp like a shield, but beneath the surface, fear churned like a restless river. We all knew what happened when settlers came with guns and hatred. The stories whispered by the elders were full of blood and loss, and none of us wanted to add to them. I spent my days moving between the camp and the settlement, trying to keep the fragile peace alive. At the settlement, some faces softened when they saw me, the boy who had returned not with vengeance, but with a message of hope. Others still saw only the enemy in me, the wild blood they had been taught to fear. One afternoon, I found myself at Miller's door. He was alone, sitting on a wooden porch that creaked beneath his weight. His eyes were tired, but sharp. "I don't understand you," he said gruffly when I approached. "I'm not here to fight," I said quietly. Miller laughed bitterly. "Words mean nothing in these parts, boy, only actions." "So I'll show you," I replied. Over the next weeks, I worked to build understanding between the settlers and the tribe. I shared stories of Silent Bear's bravery, of Iron Wolf's wisdom, of the family I had found in the woods. Slowly, some settlers began to see beyond their fears. But fear is a stubborn thing. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in fire and blood, word came that a group of settlers had attacked a hunting party from the tribe. Shots fired. Blood spilled. The fragile bridge I had worked to build began to crumble. I raced back to the camp, my heart pounding like a drum. Silent Bear was waiting, his face tight with pain. "They blame you?" he said simply. I swallowed hard. "I'm not the cause." But deep down, I knew the violence was a reflection of the hatred on both sides, a hatred I was trying to break. That night, Iron Wolf called a council. The warriors gathered around the fire, faces lit by flickering flames and shadowed by doubt. "We must not let this darkness consume us," Iron Wolf said. "We fight only to protect what is sacred. But if we lose our hearts, we lose ourselves." I felt the weight of his words settle on me like a stone. I had seen too much pain, too much loss to let hatred win. In the days that followed, I walked the fields where the settlers and the tribe had fought, gathering what I could to heal wounds on both sides. I spoke with mothers who had lost sons, with fathers who feared for their children. I shared my story not as a weapon, but as a promise that peace was possible. One afternoon, as I sat by the creek where Silent Bear had first been found, Iron Wolf approached me. "You have done more than most could dream," he said softly. "But now, a choice lies before you." He handed me the carved wooden horse, worn and weathered, but still strong. "This is the heart of our people," he said. "Carry it with honor." I nodded, feeling the weight of generations in my hands. The choice was clear. To keep walking the path of peace, no matter the cost. To be the bridge between worlds. The night before the settlers' hunting party was set to move in force, I sat alone under the stars. The carved horse clutched tightly in my palm. I thought of my parents, of the barn where I had slept, of the boy who had once been invisible. Now I was seen. I was heard. And I would not let fear or hate define me. The next morning, as the hunting party prepared to ride, I stepped forward. My voice rang out across the clearing, steady and clear. "Stop." The silence that followed was heavy. "I stand here not as your enemy," I said, "but as proof that there is another way." Miller's eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw something new there, something like understanding. "Let us not shed more blood," I continued. "Let us find peace. For the children who come after us, for the land we share." The words were met with murmurs, hesitant but hopeful. The warriors from the tribe stood behind me, silent but resolute. And in that moment, I knew the battle was not just for land or pride. It was for the future, The morning sun rose pale and hesitant, as if it too was unsure what this day would bring. The air was thick, with tension heavy, with the weight of choices not yet made and consequences not yet faced. I stood at the boundary where the forest met the dusty settlement road, the carved wooden horse resting in my palm like a talisman, a symbol of everything I had fought for and everything that still hung in the balance. The settlers arrived in a line of grim-faced men on horses, rifles slung over their shoulders, eyes scanning the woods as if expecting danger to leap from the shadows. Miller led them, his expression unreadable, hardened by years of bitterness and loss. Yet there was a flicker of something new, something I dared to hope was respect. The warriors from the tribe formed their own line opposite us, painted faces, fierce but calm, weapons lowered but ready. Silent Bear was there, his wounds healed but his eyes still holding the weight of his suffering. Iron Wolf stood tall beside him, the fire of leadership burning steady in his gaze. The silence stretched between the two groups, taut as a drawn bowstring. I stepped forward, heart pounding, voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "We have lived side by side in fear and anger for too long," I said. "Today, we have the chance to change that." Miller's eyes narrowed, but he did not interrupt. "This land has seen more blood than it deserves. Fathers, mothers, children, all lost to hatred. But it does not have to be this way." I glanced at the warriors, then back to the settlers. "I am no one special, just a boy who once hid in shadows. But I have seen what kindness can do. I have been saved by it, and I have given it in return." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some settlers shifted uneasily. Some warriors tightened their grips on their weapons. I pressed on. "We are all bound to this land. It is our home. If we fight, we lose more than just lives, we lose ourselves." Iron Wolf stepped forward, his voice strong and clear. "Words alone will not bring peace," he said. "We must trust actions to show our hearts." Miller's gaze flicked between us, and slowly he nodded. "Actions?" He agreed. Over the next hours, we met by the river that marked the edge of the settlement. I watched as men who had once looked at each other with suspicion now shared stories. The warriors showed the settlers how to track without scaring game, how to move silently through the forest. The settlers shared knowledge of farming, of tools, of medicine. At first, the conversations were awkward, words stumbling over differences in language and culture. But the common desire to survive and to live better began to weave a fragile thread of connection. I found myself in the middle of it all, a bridge between worlds I had once thought forever separate. There were moments of doubt. I overheard whispers from both sides questioning my loyalty, my sanity even. Could a boy so broken and alone really heal wounds carved by decades of violence? But those doubts only steeled my resolve. One evening, as the campfire flickered under a sky thick with stars, Silent Bear and I sat by the water's edge. He spoke softly, the words slow but full of meaning. "You have brought us hope," he said. "Not because you are strong, but because you are brave enough to be kind." I looked at the carved wooden horse hanging around his neck, worn smooth by time and memory. "We all carry our scars," I replied. "But maybe, together, we can learn to carry less hate." Days turned into weeks. The hunting parties slowed and then stopped. The raids ceased. Settlers and tribe members began to trade goods openly, sharing food and stories, laughter even. I no longer had to hide in the shadows. I walked openly among them. No longer the invisible orphan, but a symbol of something greater, a testament to the power of compassion. Yet peace is never perfect. Threats still lingered, in the form of men who saw division as strength, who thrived on conflict. Miller faced pressure from his peers to strike first, to push the tribe away. Iron Wolf's warriors had their own doubts, memories of loss too fresh to forget. But in those moments, I remembered the faces of the people who had come to trust me, the smiles of children who no longer feared the other. One evening, as the wind whispered through the trees, Iron Wolf called me to the council lodge. "The peace we have built is fragile," he said. "But it is real. You have given us a chance. What will you do now? I thought of the carved wooden horse, the symbol of a family I had never had, now a part of me. I will keep walking this path, I said, no matter how hard, no matter the cost. He nodded, a slow, approving smile breaking through the lines of age on his face. You are no longer a boy lost in the woods, he said. You are a son of this land, a keeper of its future. That night, as I lay beneath the stars, I felt the weight of all I had endured and the lightness of a hope I had never known before. I was no longer alone. I was home. The days that followed the tentative peace were some of the hardest I had ever faced, though they were filled with hope and promise. It was one thing to survive alone in the shadows, and quite another to live openly between two worlds still raw with old wounds. I found myself caught in the fragile space between the settlers and the tribe, no longer invisible but still not fully accepted by either. My skin was pale, my clothes ragged, my manners unfamiliar to both sides. But the carved wooden horse I carried, now worn and smooth in my palm, was a quiet reminder of the family I had found, a family that transcended blood and color. Iron Wolf had taken me under his wing, not just as a grandson, but as a bridge, a symbol of what might be possible if old grudges could be laid to rest. His voice, calm and steady, was a constant guide as I navigated this strange new life. We carry the past like scars on our skin, he told me one evening as we sat beneath the great fire pit of the camp. But scars can heal. They remind us where we have been, but not where we must go. His words echoed deep inside me. I wanted to believe them. I had to. But not everyone was ready to let go. Whispers traveled fast through the settlement and the tribe alike. Some settlers grumbled about trusting a red man's kin, while some warriors eyed me with suspicion, seeing in me the enemy they had been taught to fear. I understood their pain. I had once been one of the lonely ones, judged for who I was and what I wasn't. Despite Iron Wolf's wisdom and Silent Bear's healing presence, tensions simmered beneath the surface. One afternoon, as the sun burned high and the cicadas droned in the tall grass, I was walking near the boundary between the settlement and the forest when I spotted a figure lurking in the shadows. It was Thomas Miller's son, Caleb, a boy not much older than me, but hardened by his father's bitterness and the rumors that surrounded me. His eyes narrowed as he caught sight of me, and I could feel the venom behind his gaze. "White boy playing red man," he spat, voice low but sharp enough to cut. "No one here trusts you." I stood my ground, clutching the carved horse tightly, the symbol of the fragile bond I was trying to protect. "I'm not here to make enemies," I said quietly. "I'm here to make sure we don't lose each other." Caleb sneered, but before he could answer, a shout broke through the heat haze. "Trouble at the edge of the forest." The crowd gathered swiftly, tension snapping into the air like a live wire. Word spread fast. Some settlers reported seeing shadowy figures moving through the trees, armed men they didn't recognize. Fear and anger surged, and old wounds threatened to tear the fragile peace apart. I found myself beside Iron Wolf and Silent Bear as the camp prepared for possible conflict. The warriors gathered their weapons, faces painted with resolve and sorrow. The settlers armed themselves nervously, fingers tightening on rifle stocks. As the leader, Iron Wolf raised his voice. "We will face this threat not as enemies, but as one people." I swallowed the lump in my throat and looked around at the faces, the tired, the scared, the hopeful. They all wanted peace. But peace was fragile, and fear was a fire that could consume everything. We moved silently into the forest, a mixed group of settlers and warriors. The sun filtered through the leaves in shards of gold. Birdsong drowned by the pounding of our footsteps and the steady thrum of tension. Hours passed. Then, a shout. "Up head! Movement!" We slowed, weapons raised. A group of men appeared in the clearing, rough and ragged, faces unfamiliar but eyes burning with hostility. They were bandits, outlaws, preying on both settlers and tribes alike. The standoff was brief but fierce. Shots rang out, echoes bouncing off the trees, but the real surprise was how we fought not as two sides, but as one. The warriors flanked, the settlers held their ground. I saw Caleb fighting beside a warrior named Red Hawk, their faces set in grim determination. The bandits were driven off, disappearing into the wilderness, leaving behind the shattered silence of conflict. As we regrouped, Iron Wolf turned to me. "This," he said, "is the true test of our unity. Not words, but actions." Days stretched on, and with every passing moment, the settlers and warriors wove their lives tighter together. We hunted together, shared meals by the fire, and learned each other's stories. I found myself teaching Caleb how to read the signs of the forest, how to move without disturbing the earth. He grew quieter, the anger in his eyes softened by understanding. One evening, as the stars spilled across the sky like spilled salt, I sat beside Silent Bear. "You think peace can last?" I asked, the weight of so many losses heavy on my chest. He looked up at the sky, breathing deep. "Peace is not a place," he said slowly. "It is a choice, a daily decision." The carved wooden horse hung around his neck, a reminder of love lost and love found. "I choose peace," I whispered, "even if the world around me does not." The night was cold but quiet, the kind of silence that presses against your skin and fills your lungs with a stillness so deep you feel you might disappear into it. I sat by the dying embers of the fire, the last flickering light casting shadows on the faces of those who had become my family. This camp, once a place of fear and suspicion, was now a living, breathing thing, a fragile bond between settlers and warriors, stitched together by pain, mercy, and hope. But as I stared into the orange glow, I knew that what we had built could crumble in an instant. Peace was a fragile thread, stretched thin between generations of hatred. The carved wooden horse lay in my hand, smooth and familiar. It had been my anchor through everything, a symbol of a past lost and a future that might be. Iron Wolf sat nearby, his face weathered like the ancient bark of the trees around us. His eyes, sharp and clear despite his age, caught mine. "Tomorrow," he said, "we face what we cannot run from." I nodded slowly, the weight of those words sinking deep. The settlers had been uneasy since the bandits' attack. But the real threat was something darker: rumors of soldiers coming. Men sent to finish what had been started years ago, to wipe out the tribe and claim these lands forever. The next morning dawned cold and gray, the sky heavy with clouds like a warning. The camp stirred with a tension thicker than the morning fog. Warriors sharpened their knives, polished rifles, and whispered prayers to the spirits of their ancestors. Settlers fortified their cabins. Children clung to their mothers, and men stared into the distance as if trying to see the future. I stood beside Silent Bear, who, despite his injuries, had grown stronger each day. His eyes were fierce, burning with a quiet fire. "This fight," he said softly, "is not just for us. It is for all who came before and all who will come after." I looked around at the faces of those who had come to trust me, men and women who once saw me as nothing more than an outsider, now standing shoulder to shoulder with me. It was strange, being part of something bigger than myself, something that mattered. As the sun climbed higher, the first dust clouds appeared on the horizon. Soldiers, the same uniformed men who had taken so much from this land and its people. The camp erupted into a frenzy of preparation. Children were hidden, supplies secured, and warriors took their positions along the forest's edge. Iron Wolf called us together. His voice was steady, commanding respect that no age or rank could give. It came from the heart. "Today, we stand not as two peoples, but one. We fight for our right to live, to remember, to hope." My heart thundered in my chest as I gripped the carved horse, a talisman against fear. The soldiers came in waves, a relentless tide of steel and smoke. The forest echoed with gunfire and cries, but this time, the sounds were different: less chaos, more unity. The warriors fought with the strength of centuries behind them. The settlers held their ground, no longer frightened strangers but brothers and sisters in arms. I moved through the smoke and blood, helping where I could, bandaging wounds, steadying frightened hands, reminding those around me why we fought. Amid the battle, I saw Caleb, no longer the bitter boy who once spat hatred, but a young man fighting for something greater than his fear. Our eyes met briefly, a silent understanding passing between us. At one point, Silent Bear was hit, collapsing beneath a hail of bullets. I ran to him, pressing my hands against his wound, whispering words I hoped he could hear. "You're not alone," I told him. "We're all here." His hand found mine, gripping it tightly before his eyes closed. The battle raged for hours, a relentless storm that left no one untouched. But slowly, the tide turned. The soldiers faltered, disoriented by the unexpected unity and determination of those they had thought weak and divided. Finally, as the sun dipped low, casting the forest in a golden-red glow, the last shots rang out. Silence! We stood among the fallen and the survivors, breathless and broken but unbowed. Iron Wolf, his face streaked with sweat and dirt, raised his voice once more. "This is our land," he declared, voice carrying across the clearing. "This is our future, and no one will take it from us." As the camp began to quiet, I felt something deep inside me shift, a fierce, burning ember of belonging and purpose. I looked around at the faces illuminated by the firelight warriors, settlers, children, all united by a shared fight and a fragile hope. The carved wooden horse was heavy in my hands, but it was no longer just a symbol of loss. It was a beacon of new beginnings. I knew that the road ahead would be long and hard. There would be scars that never fully healed, and memories that burned with pain. But for the first time, I believed that maybe, just maybe, kindness could outlast hate. That a boy like me, once forgotten and alone, could find a place to call home. And as the stars blinked awake in the night sky, I whispered to the wind, "I am here. I belong." If you were in his shoes, would you have fought the same battle? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like the video and explore the other stories waiting for you on screen.